Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 410, and today's guest is Paul Holder, CEO and co-founder of OnRamp. I've been working with startups since 1998, and that's nearly 28 years now. Since the beginning, I've always noticed the massive impact that startups can have on one's career. Take Paul, who joined an early stage startup called Troops, which was later acquired by Salesforce. During his tenure there and at a software company prior, he didn't just experience the rocket ship growth and accelerated career path that comes along with a successful startup, but he also identified the massive challenge that led to OnRamp. It's a challenge that faces every company, not just software companies, and that's customer onboarding. Founded in 2020, OnRamp is the intelligent, AI-enabled customer onboarding and engagement platform that helps companies accelerate adoption, strengthen customer relationships, and unlock revenue growth. The company recently announced its $15 million Series A round of funding led by Koch Disruptive Technologies, with contributions from existing investors like Contour, Javelin, Pear, and others. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like advice on taking the entrepreneurial leap of faith and why you have to commit to a decade-long vision to build something meaningful, Paul's background studying finance at Boston College and his early career in strategy consulting, his time at Hightower, where he met his co-founder Ross Lerner, and leading customer success and post-sales revenue at Troops, how the friction of onboarding customers led to the original idea behind OnRamp, building their first version using Bubble, a no-code solution long before vibe coding became a buzzword, and how they landed on those crucial early adopters, how OnRamp stays disciplined with their product roadmap while integrating AI to solve real-world customer pain points, how they've successfully moved upmarket to land some of the world's largest companies, and their philosophy on hiring the first sales leader, and so much more. All right, now here's a brief word from our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Paul. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. We've got a lot to talk about because you're in major growth stages with OnRamp. So we're going to break down the company and what you're all about. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about your background story that we're going to talk about is, first-time founders. Lots of people have ideas. Ideas are a dime a dozen, but it takes a bold leap of faith for somebody to actually go out and start a company. So what advice would you have for that person that's kind of sitting there wrestling in their head, like, I've got these ideas or I've got a great idea, but man, to go off and actually take that leap of faith, like, how do I do that? And why would I do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's true. It is certainly a leap of faith, and you have to be ready for all the ups and downs, highs and lows, all the things you hear about. But I think it's funny, that decision to say, I'm going to do this, I'm gonna make that leap, like that, ultimately a lot of that comes from your gut. At some point you will have imperfect information with which to make that decision, and you have to just either say, I'm excited enough to wake up every day and work on this problem, or I'm not. And the one thing that I tell first-time founders actually is, you have to be excited enough to say, I'm excited to work on this for 10 years. I think a lot of people start and they say, oh, I'm just excited to work on this problem. But when you really sit down with them, they think about it as far as a year or 2 years or some sprint, right? And the reality is for some founders, that's true. And it's this, wild ride that lasts a very short time. But for many, it's one that can last up to a decade. And so, I think it's really important that you are excited enough about the problem to wake up for a decade and want to go tackle it.
You know what? I don't think anyone's ever said that on this podcast, and we're 400 episodes in, and I couldn't agree more. Like that, you got to be excited. VentureFizz has been around for 15 years now, which it's a flash, right? And there's things that we've done differently, that we evolve, and we continue to just constantly think how we're going about our business. So, yeah, you need to be ready. So, and also solving a problem that you're passionate about, right? Where VentureFizz was just a natural transition for me in doing what I do.
Hmm.
Um, I've always seen, I don't think I've ever had an entrepreneur on the podcast that said, I sat around a whiteboard, me and my co-founder, and we just mapped out ideas and we said that one and it worked, right? You need to kind of like experience and like live the problem, which is what we're going to talk about with you. So, all right, well, let's rewind the clock. Where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town called Poughkeepsie, New York, about 2 hours north of New York City. Fond memories of growing up there. I think as a child, oh, and could ask my parents, but I'd like to say I was pretty well rounded, and I was that kid that I always had to like touch everything, right? So I was always curious about the world around me, and ultimately, my tech curiosity grew so much that I decided I wanted to make a career out of it. But always was interested in sports, school, having a social life, like trying to just be as well rounded as possible. And yeah, my childhood was fairly normal, but I am very I'm someone who would like to think that I had many different interests as a child growing up. So
All right, so what led you to Boston College to study finance?
yeah, I mean, if you've ever been to Boston College, it's easy to visit campus and then fall in love with the place. But for
Totally.
me, yeah,
Absolutely.
for me, a big piece of it was I was accepted in the honors program there, and that was really formative for that became basically the social network that I have even to this day. So BC doesn't have like frats or sororities or that type of thing. That was my group, through college, and just going to school with just incredibly exceptional people who have now gone on to do incredibly exceptional things. It's an experience I'll never forget. And as I said, like many of my good friend group today is still from that program. So why finance? It's funny. I knew I did not want to do finance as far as being a banker at all. I knew that from the moment I picked the major. But at BC is kind of like either finance or accounting, and I sure was not excited about accounting. So did finance and said, I'll figure out my way from here.
Yeah, that's like with a finance degree, you can really do pretty much anything. It's a good
That's
foundation.
that's right. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Okay, getting your career started. So what did you do first?
Yeah, I worked at a strategy consulting firm called LEK. Um, the high level strategy consulting. We competed with McKinsey, Bain, BCG. So similar projects. A lot of what I did though was a fair amount of due diligence for private equity. Diligence deals that they were looking at. And that was what was it kind of fed my curiosity because we just worked on such a variety of different industries and projects. It was never like, I didn't get specific to say, oh, I'm just going to focus on retail or, oh, I'm just going to focus on healthcare. In my 2 years that I was there, obviously I was just getting my career started, but, it saw what we did across 10, 12 different verticals and 10, 12 different industries. So, say what you will about consulting. One of the cool things is you do get exposure to so many different businesses and ways of doing. And I appreciated that exposure really early on for me.
Okay, was there one industry that you had no idea about it, yet you were like, wow, who knew?
I remember I had to do a diligence for is private equity firm was looking at like essentially like playground and recreational equipment companies. And I had to do a market size for how many park benches there were in the US, how many ADA accessible like lifts there were, how many bicycle, along the trail you'll have like these bicycle stations, how
Yeah.
many of those existed in the US.
Wow.
So that one was certainly unique. That was certainly unique for me.
That's awesome. All right, so what led you down the next path of getting into the tech industry?
Yeah, growing up, I always loved tech. I always loved. I still do today. I love tech. Obviously, when you're younger, it's consumer tech. You don't spend your days thinking about B2B software or B2B technology. But I knew two things. Like my dad started his own business, so I always had that entrepreneurial bug. I loved start, I love the startup. As startups started to get, in vogue, I just love this idea of ownership. I love this idea of making your mark in the world, and I combined that with my love for technology. And I said, hey, listen, now that I've been in the business world for a couple of years, I think there's going to be a huge explosion of business need for new technology and innovation. And this was back 15 years ago. And so all of that led me to say, okay, cool. Where can I find a fit with my background and experience? And found it at a company called Hightower, which is now VTS. It's a real estate software company that caters to brokers and asset managers. That's an industry I knew nothing about, but I knew, hey, if I can learn about bike pumps and ADA accessible chair lifts, I think I can learn. I think I can learn real estate. So landed there as my first kind of B2B software experience.
So what was your entry point? Like, what was your role?
Yeah, I was in customer success. So I ended up leading customer onboarding, which ultimately led to the creation of OnRamp. But yeah, it was kind of this, hey, we kind of had to be consultative with our customers. We had to develop a process. We had to see that through. We had to be measuring the effectiveness of our program. My experience in consulting helped lead to that. But yeah, I think it was a mix of me being enough of a people person to be able to work with new clients coming in the door, as well as the company challenging me and our team to say, hey, how can we make this more of a conveyor belt? How can we get our customers to value faster? That type of thing.
What did you do after that?
I ended up leading customer success as the first business hire at a company called Troops, which was a Salesforce Slack integration. The idea was it was actually AI before AI was cool in some ways, but largely a workflow platform where you could interact with your CRM through Slack. And so the idea of Slack is going to be this new OS, right? And your CRM data should come to you there, and you should be able to interact with it there. But what's interesting about that role, at Hightower, I saw a sliver of the revenue ownership, right? At Troops, I saw the entire post sale, process and owned the entire post sale nut, so to speak. And so that was just a cool step up opportunity for me.
And how big was the company and were they funded? Like what stage were they at when you joined?
Yeah, they were Series A funded at the time. Man, how big were they? Not too big. I think 10 or 11 people. So it was pretty early on. And it was mostly from the business side. I was the first like business hire outside the founders, which is kind of cool. They hired customer success, I guess, first, which was a neat thing. So
And
and candidly, like I knew I probably wanted to start a business someday. Me getting closer to that creation point was attractive to me as well, right? Obviously, a company with 0 to 5 employees or 0 to 10 employees is vastly different than, even 10 to 20 is vastly different from 20 to 50.
what like just the VTS company, what was that the size of that company? Were they larger than Troops?
Yeah, when I joined, they were 20. I was like the 22nd hire or something like that,
Okay.
but it was in
That's
pretty
smaller.
rapid scale up mode. And we ended up at about 100 and something by the time I left there.
So you're a perfect case study of why I always promote, going to more startup oriented companies because of the exposure and breadth of experience that you gain and the career trajectory that you experience at a very rapid pace. Because when you join Troops, now you're leading customer success and you ran that operation and built it and you cut your teeth at VTS. So like that's just why I promote, there's always a risk, but there's a risk going to big companies too these days. So it doesn't matter.
And I
So.
mean, listen, when you're young, like, so here's the thing. I guess my advice to most people is this: like, I appreciated my management consulting background in large part because it taught me how to do a model and run Excel and create presentations and some of those hardline business skills that you need no matter where you go. But once you kind of have some of that baseline, I totally agree. Like, you got to go take a leap. Like, if you're going to do it, and especially when you're younger, like, then that's kind of the time to do it. And worst case, you get a great experience out of it and you go find something else. Best case scenario, you're kind of setting yourself up for a potentially great career or, really your own journey in the way that you want to do it.
Okay, so the 3 years you're at Troops, what did you learn during that stretch? Because the company did eventually get acquired by Salesforce, right? Later on.
They did. Yeah, that was basically like right as I was leaving, the company got acquired by Salesforce. But yeah, I saw, I think just getting exposed to more of leadership and what the overall company was doing, and the founders and what they were focused on day to day. That was really eye-opening for me, right? Like when you're at a big company, or even when, my time at Hightower where I was just one piece of the puzzle, you kind of think about your lane and you think about your part of the business, and not much else. And I think, for me at Troops, the exposure to really understand what's happening across the business, both good and what we needed to improve, was incredibly valuable. I think I also learned, I mean, just the reason I started OnRamp, I also I was owning the whole post-sale side of the revenue, but it kept coming to me. It kept coming back to, did we onboard a customer successfully or not? And if the answer was yes, I felt really good about our ability to retain and grow with them. If the answer was no, we almost had no shot. So that just reaffirmed for me the problem space that I ended up starting, OnRamp with.
Okay, so what was the onboarding process like at Troops?
Yeah. So it was at Troops, it was fairly straightforward. It was higher volume and lower complexity than my time at Hightowers. So I kind of saw a spectrum of how it was run. Ultimately, what we did was, new customer would sign, they'd come in the door. We would set them up with a series of kind of quick wins in our platform so they could see value really quickly. Slack Salesforce integration was, you could set that up pretty quickly and get some quick wins. The closed win gong was the big victory thing, where if a deal won in Salesforce, it would trigger a celebration in Slack, which at the time was very actually quite novel. And then we got into deeper layers of workflow. So we would oftentimes map with our customer like the key sales processes that their A's would run and have to update. And we'd say, okay, cool. How can we use Troops to help make that process easier, reduce the admin time? And through that, we would set up additional triggers, we called them, at Troops, and eventually got to a place where, okay, if we saw consistent usage with our users, they were live and getting value, from our standpoint. And then we kind of move them on to the next phase.
What was the trigger to be like, uh-oh, like meaning you're not seeing the engagement, like the first couple tasks
Yes.
that you expect them to make, like you're like, uh-oh, this is not gonna end well.
Yeah, I mean, again, you'd have everyone set up our the sales wing gong. Like that was obvious that was easy and obvious to everybody. Some people got stuck there though, right? They were like, I don't see how Troops can really help me. Like, cool, I get that it's this cool, when something happens in Salesforce, I can trigger this notification here. Like, that's interesting. But where we would see, where we often map to customer stalling out, would be 2 or 3 weeks could go by and they wouldn't have done anything else, right? And so we created strategies, of course, around giving people use cases and setting things up for them automatically, and creating, email effort, right, to get people past that hump. But that was often a moment that we looked at quite closely.
And the reason why I'm getting into the weeds of this part of the story is because this was the genesis of what led you down the path of starting OnRamp, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think we looked at, I started to look at the tools I had in my disposal to make this process easier and better and smoother, not only for my team internally, but also for our customers. And it was really just an amalgamation of bubble gum and duct tape, and a smattering of different tools and a smattering of frustrated, broken processes that, ultimately led me and my co-founder to say, hey, I think there might be something here worth looking at.
And it's one of these segments that, and this is why I think you're building a company around it. It's not a focus as it should be and a priority that it should be, meaning sales is a priority, and it's, unless it's just magic that you're selling things off the shelf left and right, it's usually a hard process to finally get that point where the gong is sounded, from a sale. So I was listening to Lenny's podcast, and he had the founder and CEO of Gamma on. And so Grantley, he couldn't emphasize the onboarding process more. He just said, that was the turning point of our business. He's like, we were number one on product hunts, and we did these great things, and we had a rocket ship growth, and then all of a sudden it just flatlined, and we'd be like this. And then he talks about people would do things, but then they wouldn't do what we expected them to do. And he's like, once we refigured and focused on the onboarding process, that's when we've seen the growth to our $100 million ARR. So anyways, for people that don't understand the onboarding process and the complexity and what it can result in your business, listen to that and I'll put it in the show notes. It's an amazing episode where I was just like, wow, this is perfect timing for me to talk to Paul. So what led you down the path? Like how'd you meet your co-founder and then, start to build a company?
Yeah. So met my co-founder actually at Hightower. Ross was actually on my team, the onboarding team, for a short period of time. He then moved to finance and operations, and he went to Bombas, the stock company, for a couple years. And we'd always just kept in touch. He ended up going to HBS, so we went to business school. And him and I just continued to ruminate on, hey, what are what are the biggest problems we're seeing in B2B technology, or business to business, like friction today? And let's explore that a little bit more. And the great thing about your co-founder going to business school is they have time to explore. They have time to explore things. So for us, we were like, yeah. Again, I think everyone recognizes customer onboarding as this critical moment and this really pivotal moment, but yet the tools that we're using are primitive. We look to our left on the sales side, many billion-dollar businesses made up of really robust, complex sales tools that are getting funded. Even on the right, on the account management side, you have these players like Gainsight, for example, who would speak to more of the account management side of things and overall customer lifecycle. But no one's really tackled the really hard problem of getting those customers up and running and live. So, through that lens, us had a PM. He was in a PM 101 class, so product management 101, and part of the class was, hey, you got to start a company, and like, how are you going to go about testing your hypothesis and all that fun stuff. And we used what ended up being OnRamp as the genesis for that. So it was great about that. We got some free labor to go help us do a bunch of interviews and think through the problem at a much deeper level. And long story short, coming out of that, we're like, turns out our experience at Hightower and Minor Troops wasn't so unique, and there could really be something here. And so, through that, we continued to gather our data points that ultimately led us to starting on it.
Okay, so I listened to some other podcasts that you were a part of before our conversation, and I love how you started to build a company using Bubble. So it's like MVP, and it's something where you can be dangerous. You don't want to build it to be your, enterprise scale type of solution, but certainly can do a lot with, and that was pre, Lovable and Bolts and all these, vibe coding tools that are out there. So like, how did you get started using Bubble? Because you still need to sink your teeth into it. It's not just. I mean, like I looked at
Yeah.
Bubble once and I was like, whoa, there's too much here. This is going to take me a while to
Yeah.
figure this out.
Yeah. Don't I wish some of these vibe coding tools existed when we started
Totally.
on Ramp? Certainly would have used that. I think got started because it was kind of there was a limited set of options for us, right? Ross and I are not technical co-founders, and really we had to answer the question: A, can software actually solve the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Is it a software problem? And B, will anybody pay for this, period? Like that, those are the two things that we were laser focused on. And for us, like, the answer wasn't to go hire some expensive engineer and build this crazy product and then go do it. It was like, what's the quickest and fastest and easiest way for us to test those hypotheses, right? And so Bubble at the time was the answer. And yes, I will admit we certainly tried to get set up on it ourselves and took all the courses and did a bunch of learning and all of that. We got started. We then turns out there's a great stable of, at the time, there's a great stable of really inexpensive help, like developer help, I'll call it, but really Bubble help, that helped polish it and actually get it live for us in a usable state. So that was our strategy at the time, and I think it was still a good one. I think obviously the tools we would use now might be a little bit different, though.
All right, getting your early adopter customers, like, how did you get started with that? Like, that's, hey, we've got this idea, we've been using this platform, no code solution. We think we are onto something, but until someone does what you're trying to prove, pay for it and use it, right? So, how did you get the early adopter customers, and what types of businesses were they?
Yeah, it was, I mean, I think it's classic startup stuff, but through that PM 101 class and through Ross and I saying, hey, this is a problem we want to work on, we probably interviewed 150 like customer success leaders or onboarding folks, that's a great first lead set to go after, right? And so, it was cool. We interviewed them and we got them excited about the problem we were working on. And we said, hey, we actually have something. Is this interesting enough for you to use? And it's amazing how many people that are really excited to talk to you and theoretically, all of a sudden, when they're asked to put their credit card down, they are not as excited, right? But we at least early on, right, but we found through them, our first set of users, and they're talking to you anyway because they're just excited about technology and excited about the problem space. They are early adopters. For us, it was that really, it was that other startups, right? So really small companies just getting off the ground. And that's typically how you get started in something like this. And we took those learnings and then continued to like iterate, and obviously that early feedback was invaluable.
All right, at what point did you feel like, okay, we've got enough traction now, let's go hire an actual engineer and build this platform outside of the bubble world?
Yeah. So we got our first handful of customers, and God, it may have been 10 customers, 10 to 20 customers, and paying us like God, $25 a month or something. It's something crazy small.
They paid though. They paid.
They paid, and that for us, but they paid, and that for us unlocked our pre-seed round, when coming out of business school for us. And with that, we were able to actually get on board our first developer, Sean's, who, shout out to Sean, he's still with us today. Great guy. He's been with us along this whole journey. So for us, that we had enough momentum at that, at least early momentum, to say, okay, I think it's time to get off bubble. We've clearly stretched the limits of what this thing can do. Let's re-architect this thing on our own platform and actually build this thing for real. And so that's what we did with Sean
So
on
what
board.
what were you doing? Like, what was the product then?
So the product as it is today is a two-sided platform where companies can set up their onboarding programs and permutations and combinations and run them through the admin side. And then we create this customer portal, these subdomains that they can send their customers to run through the onboarding experience along with them. That we did that in Bubble. It was just the simplest, most basic version of those things. So you could have one type of task or workflow. You could have one playbook, we call them. Like the portal, that subdomain experience was very, very basic. So it's funny, we've never full scale had to pivot the business. We've just continued to build on top of it. So that still exists today, but certainly the level of complexity and customizations and permutations in the platform has risen dramatically as we've matured.
Well, that's impressive for you to kind of start out with a vision and continue down the path, because a trap that a lot of entrepreneurs fall under is you've got customers that request, wait, can you do X, Y, and Z? Yet it's not the path you were thinking, but you're like, oh, that's revenue. How do you not deviate and chase things, shiny
We
objects?
still deal with that today. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that that's not something that we still deal with today. And it's funny. It's like when you go into entrepreneurship, you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna only pick the best fit customers, and we're gonna say no to everybody else. And that sounds wonderful until you have actual revenue goals to hit and
Right.
commercial goals and teams with expectations. And so the reality is that life exists on a spectrum, and so you have to be smart enough to sometimes say no, right? But you have to be smart enough to say, I know who's going to be a really good fit for our platform. And I know that this customer may look slightly outside of that, but we're interested in bringing them on. Maybe it's a new vertical. Maybe it's a certain type of integration or workflow they have that we know other customers like really want, right? So I think it's just being really smart about the revenue you bring in. It's not always, it'd be too simple to say you could just say no to every customer that doesn't fit the perfect pretty profile, right? That's just not reality.
I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, so fast forward to today. What have you built around the core product that still exists?
Yeah, totally. So at this point, almost every one of our customers integrates OnRamp with their CRM, and they set up we have these automation and workflow triggers where, as various things are happening in the CRM through the deal process, OnRamp's gathering that information. And ultimately, what it'll do is feed it into OnRamp's engine to create the best onboarding experience and best program for that particular customer. And for our really sophisticated customers, right, this isn't one size fits all. They may have 30, 40, 50 different permutations and combinations of those programs, depending on who the customer is, when they bought, what support tier they had. Like, obviously it can get pretty gnarly, right, depending on the size of the business. And through that, then, though, what they do is they'll share their onboarding program with their customers through the OnRamp portal. And this is a bespoke custom domain and custom experience that looks and feels and is branded like the company that guides the customer step by step through the onboarding process. And as all that's running, we're collecting data and analysis and feeding that back to their systems, right? That might trigger automation and workflow along the way. Obviously, onboarding touches so much of the business that we end up connecting with just a bunch of different systems internally for our customers as well.
Onboarding exists for like every business. You don't think about it until like I listened to another one of your podcasts and I was just like, oh, because I just live in the world of tech and software. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
onboarding software. But no, it's like, so I think an example you shared was like, CVS, right? Like that they're a customer. So how do they use this platform?
Yeah. We actually healthcare has been an interesting vertical for us. Where things are highly regulated and there's a lot of steps and there's a lot of permutations and combinations. We do really well because it's a really complex beast today. I'll give you, I think a more apt example is Cardinal Health. They're a big healthcare distributor and they work with mom and pop pharmacies, right? So a mom and pop pharmacy will sign a contract with Cardinal, and until that pharmacy is onboarded, they cannot transact with Cardinal. So every day that goes by that they're not being onboarded, Cardinal's missing out on revenue, right? And so what happens is, though, in order to actually get set up on Cardinal's systems, there's a bunch of legal, compliance, system setup, user admin support, training, right? All these different modules that previously Cardinal has like 10 different teams that they would bear down on the customer, like in various ways through like email and outdated methods, that today just gets streamlined very easily through OnRamp. And so, we've significantly for them reduced their time to revenue, essentially is the key metric for them.
And that's just such a powerful like way of thinking about it. Where I was like, yeah, onboarding is something every company deals with their onboarding of customers.
Yeah.
So
Now listen, right? Like the way OnRamp does, it's true. And that's why we get so excited about this opportunity. I think to your point before on being smart about the revenue you're bringing in, there's certainly types of onboarding that OnRamp is not equipped to support today. If you're fully just PLG, for example, that is not what we do. But at the end of the day, for us, like, we're so excited about the fact that, yeah, every company that's growing or has customers has to do this. That sounds like a pretty big TAM to me.
endless TAM. Your presentation of
That,
VCs
yeah, that's
endless.
the easy VC. That's the VC slide. TAM endless. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Speaking of funding, so you just announced a Series A. So talk about that.
Yeah, really excited to partner with Koch Disruptive Technologies, who took the lead on a $15 million round. And, we had some great participation from our existing investors as well. So really, really thrilled about that. We spent last year, Ross and I spent a lot of time building out our go-to-market function and finding repeatability, right? Getting out of just founder-led selling into, hey, can we actually have other people drop in and do this and build some repeatability? With this fundraising now, a lot of it's going to be towards product and engineering and accelerating our roadmap. And it's pretty clear to us now, that we have hundreds of customers, where the product needs to go in the direction that we want to go. So now we get to pour a little fuel on that fire and try to capture some demand that we know is sitting out there for us. So yeah, we're really excited about it.
All right. So the question that is on everyone's mind, the use of AI. So how do you, intend to use that?
Yeah, totally. For us, we want our customers to view AI and OnRamp as a trusted partner that kind of sits alongside them in the process and makes their life easier in a number of different ways. The first, we actually just released what we call AI summaries in OnRamp. So as I mentioned, OnRamp's collecting all this great data about how the onboarding is performing, what data is being collected, who's doing what and when, right? With OnRamp now, with OnRamp AI summaries, we could take that information, extract it out, summarize it for our executive or management stakeholders, and tell them, here are the bottlenecks in your system, right? Like, here's what's working well. Here's where your customers are getting tripped up, right? And here's the impact of that to your programs. And by the way, here's some recommendations on what you can do to fix that based on best practices, what you've been doing in the past, and what our other customers are seeing. And so, yeah, for us, again, like, just one example of us leveraging AI, not just as a simple wrapper, but as a way to help enable action for our customers. So, yeah.
And so I think it's interesting that you talked about the funding and each like what you intend to use those funds for. So a lot of times I talk to companies, they'll raise their seed, build product, still building product, maybe a little go to market, but B round, that's heavy go to market. Um, so it's been an interesting transition for you as
Mhm.
far as you and your co-founder figuring out the go-to-market strategy, maybe a little bit earlier than what I've seen other companies do. I don't know if that's the case or not. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
pulling that out of my head. But
No, no, no. It's true. Yeah.
but what I wanted to get deep on you is your go-to-market strategy. So what did you figure out during that time? Because product-led, founder-led sales is like a thing, right? But you can't scale that. You can only go so far. So what did you learn?
Yeah, I think we learned a couple of things that were really interesting, and why we kind of took the path we did, which is a little different than the classic startup advice. So classic startup kind of go to market strategy, right? Is you're going to start working with other really small companies and other startups and those early adopters. And early on, that is in fact what we did, right? Anybody's going to give us dollars. But we realized something probably 12 to 18 months ago, and that was bigger, more sophisticated organizations need OnRamp and value OnRamp, at a multiple of what some of these smaller SMBs are doing, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense. Well, bigger companies, they have a lot more complexity in their onboarding. They have a lot more teams. They have a lot more people. They have a lot more products and sophistication. And so and solving this problem, or even moving the needle 10, 20%, is millions of dollars to them, right? Where if I'm a small company and I onboard a couple customers a month, oftentimes we actually turn those customers away at this point, because we're like, hey, agree that this is really important for you, but you need to go figure this out. You're like, we're not going to help, like, we're not going to be your onboarding team, right? You have to figure out your process first, and then come back to us when you're really trying to optimize and it becomes overwhelming, and you're trying to, be cost effective in the way that you deliver your program. And so for us, we actually went up market much faster, or earlier, than I think the traditional startup path would lead. And with that, of course, comes enterprise selling. And enterprise selling is a lot about the humans and the relationships, and dealing with procurement and all of that. So for us, building that muscle early and proving we could do that with some repeatability was really, really important. And so that's kind of why we took the path that we did, that perhaps is a little different than most.
And what's been your approach as to acquiring new customers, like the lead gen and the marketing funnel? Like what's like what was effective there?
Yeah, totally. We're a big outbound shop. So we're an 80% outbound shop. So we believe, it's funny, people are like, SDRs are dead and it doesn't work. It's like, no, ineffective and mass marketing that doesn't have a value prop that resonates with who you're trying to target, that's dead. There's always going to be a place for finding the right person at the right time, and spreading the message. I think for us, right, like, this is a new category of software. So much of what we're doing is just trying to educate the market, right? We aren't a new CRM coming in being like, hey, we're just better than Salesforce because we do X, Y, and Z. Like, oh, cool. Somebody's like, of course I know what a CRM is. I don't need to learn about that. When we say, hey, we're customer onboarding software, and it's customer onboarding and engagement software, they're like, what the heck is that? Never even heard of that before. So much of our efforts and our marketing efforts go to educating the market and just making them aware that this exists. And so for us, a heavy outbound effort. We do a lot of, we're ramping up our content. Again, we got our SDRs on the phone and doing drip campaigns all the time with prospects. We're at events, educating the market that way, right? So a lot of that feeds into our strategy that's been successful so far. And I'm excited about the day, I will say, when, we talk to, today we talked to 90% of our prospects and they're like, never heard of this before. I'm excited for the day when we pick up the phone and say, customer onboarding software. Oh, of course I've heard of you. This is great, right? So that's what we're kind of driving towards.
Hopefully, there'll be some parallels to the success of HubSpot when a thing called inbound marketing never existed, and Dharmesh and Brian Halligan started that. So, like,
Yeah. A guy named Frank Auger leads our customer success team, and he was an early exec at HubSpot. He actually built their customer success function from the early days. Ended up becoming CIO there, but he was part of this story of educating the market on something that previously didn't exist. So it's a really good parallel to our story, I think.
all right. One of the things that I've noticed, and I don't know if I connected with you or on LinkedIn and Ross or just started following OnRamp, but you guys are very active on LinkedIn. So what has your strategy been with leveraging LinkedIn, and how should other startups think about it?
Totally. The thought leadership stuff is really huge. And I think it's funny. I have a love hate with it, just candidly. I'll be honest with you, right? There's a little bit of it that's like feels a little bit performative and a little bit of like, oh, we're just putting content out to put content out. But I think if you do it the right way, and we try to, as much as possible, reaching your market, having, certainly something like us, customer operations, customer success, no matter the vertical, no matter the customer we're serving, it is a tight community. It is a pretty tight circle at the end of the day. And I think LinkedIn's a great place to kind of have your voice heard and say, here's what we believe, and you may agree with it, you may not, but let's have an interesting discussion about this. I think for us, that's been a really invaluable part of our strategy. And so again, the purpose is so when somebody gets a call from our SDRs or gets an email or hears about us at an event, it's not the first time that they've heard the name OnRamp. They've maybe they've come across a post or they've interacted in some way with us. So yeah, big part of our strategy, and it's worked well for us. I don't see us stopping that investment anytime soon.
How do your SDRs end up reaching out to people? So they're not mass emailing, so they're just doing a very focused email to one person or a LinkedIn message or a call.
A lot of it's calls. A lot of it's calls. They,
How do they get
obviously,
numbers and people pick up?
yeah, believe it or not, people do pick up. We have, obviously there's tooling today, like Nooks is the one that we use that helps like, do parallel dialing. So you're not just sitting there like hitting a button, of course. But yeah, I mean, people still do pick up the phone. And again, I think you have to recognize it's part of a multi-touch approach. Like maybe they don't pick up the phone the first time, but they listen to that voicemail and then they go on LinkedIn and they see, did I hear about that company? And then, we follow up with a piece of thought content, right? Or, one of our recent content, 8 ways onboarding's killing your revenue, got a ton of downloads, right? They download that. And so all of a sudden you start to build this story for them of, hey, this thing's interesting enough. I should go check this out. Right. So, like anything, there's never a silver bullet to anything. You really have to take a comprehensive approach, right, to these things.
At what point did you decide to hire your first salesperson, and what did that profile look like?
Yeah, probably, when we Ross and I probably sold, I want to say 30 deals, maybe 25, 30 deals. And we said, okay, like neither of us would call ourselves good salesmen. So we were like, we think someone else can probably do this, but it's really important to start testing. Can someone outside the founder go sell this thing? And really your first salesperson is super duper tricky, right? It's got to be someone that's willing to get in the trenches with you, to be an evangelist, to be able to speak to a problem, right, as much as the actual solution, and to get someone to buy in on a vision in many ways, right? Like it's got to be, people will only buy into startups if they kind of see where you're going and are excited about that vision. So having someone who is an entrepreneurial sales rep is really critical. Obviously, it goes without saying you don't want someone who's not to pick on HubSpot, but who was at HubSpot for the past 2 years and part of the 5,000 person organization who got handed a sales playbook, right? And that's not gonna work for a startup.
Right. And then you brought in a sales leader. What advice would you have on hiring your first sales leader?
they also got to be in the weeds, right? We took great lengths to say, there's certainly those sales leaders out there who are great, but they're really just there to manage and run numbers. And finding a sales leader who's going to help close the deal, understand where you're winning or not versus your competition, help your reps get better, help train them, right? Go through those coaching sessions, figure out, find those pockets of, especially a horizontal solution like us, find those pockets where, oh, we had that one domino fall. Let's go explore. Let's go explore the others in that area. Is that lower hanging fruit? Like someone who can think analytically, someone who obviously is a great salesperson themselves, someone who is again is a force of nature. Ultimately, like these are all the things that you look for in your first sales leader hire. It is a really important role, but really hard to get right.
All right, what's the plan for hiring looking ahead?
Yeah, we are so through this raise, we have hired probably a good 10 to 15 people over the past couple of months. And the reality is like we have some hiring certainly happening through the end of the year and early next year, but we are trying not to get too ahead of our skis, right? We are taking an approach where, cool, we're kind of setting ourselves up for success next year, but we have to prove, we got to prove that out. And so for us, what we are trying to do is maintain a somewhat lean team while chasing increasingly difficult revenue goals, right? And forcing ourselves to be as disciplined as possible. By the way, that approach certainly different than when I was at High Tower, where I seemed to be like, go hire as many people as you need, just like keep throwing money at it, like burn the boats, like the whole thing. I think the world's changed a bit, and so I think ultimately that will create healthier businesses. But we are trying to be mindful of our growth and investment versus efficiency metrics as we grow here.
And what's the culture like at OnRamp? Like you just moved into new office space, right?
We are moving in hopefully in 2 to 3 weeks that we're very,
Okay,
very excited
coming.
about. Yep.
Nice.
About half our team is in Boston, about half of it's remote. And one of the key focuses for us as a company is how do we make sure that everyone feels like part of Team OnRamp, right? I think when you think about, we have a sales team that comes in every single day, 5 days a week, right? And they're together, right? Then we have, our engineering team that's spread more across the country, right? And as part of raising this money is, getting more resources, fortunately, to be able to do things like cross team get-togethers and full team get-togethers and finding ways to make us feel like a cohesive unit as a company. I'd be lying if I said it was easy. It's not. I think I talked to a lot of founders. We all struggle with this to a degree, right? But what you can do is try to make sure that your mission, your culture ultimately comes from your mission and how you treat people and what you reward and what you don't reward, right? And so just being really mindful of that, whether you're in person or remote, is how we're approaching this.
All right, so you graduated from Boston College. The BC Alumni Network is it's very powerful, right?
It is very powerful. Yeah, there's a small but mighty group of entrepreneurs at BC, and for example, an investor in us is SSC, and they just back BC entrepreneurs. And Tom Coburn, for example, is one of the pioneers of the BC entrepreneurship community that closer to my age, started Jebit,
Debit.
was successful there. Yep. And so leaned on him, and he's part of the SSC group and network and everything. And guys like Peter Bell, huge a VC with Amity, but also part of the SSC network. It's great just to find people who have gone through similar experiences as you and be able to lean on them through your entrepreneurship journey. I mean, going it alone is not an option. That's for sure. That's for sure.
And then there was the WePay founders that they were acquired by JP Morgan Chase, I think. So that was another set of BC alum. Then like anytime I kind of
Yeah.
link into a school and kind of like there's others too that I'm not mentioning. And then there's like lots of executives that have a BC pedigree. Like I didn't know this until I just Googled it, but it was like the CEO of J. Crew is a BC alum. Who knew? Olivia Waddle.
I didn't even know that, but that's awesome. I love it. Go Eagles.
Very powerful. So all right, 3 apps you can't live without, can't be Slack, email, or calendar.
Yeah, I'm gonna go non-work on this if that's okay.
That's totally cool.
I could give Chat GPT as the vanilla answer. That's fine. But for me, yeah, I was thinking about this. I'm a big consumer tech nerd, and I have my home is all like smart automationed out. So I use Alexa to like run all the automations and routines and all of that. I'm constantly tinkering with the various stuff. So just from a personal hobby standpoint, I probably couldn't live without that. My Photos app. I mean, that sounds like a cop out answer, but listen, I love going back, looking at my memories, and like obviously capturing the moments, especially now with a young family is just just really really critical to me. And then listen, I'm from or I'm not from New England, but I'm now in New England, so I gotta have my Dunkin' app, my Dunkin' Donuts app.
Ah,
That's really critical. You
nice.
gotta get the 2 for 1 iced coffee. Go through the drive through. That's a really important part of the day.
That's perfect. Podcast or book recommendation for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I'll give you. How about this? I'll give you one. I'll give you one that's related to my business, and then one outside of that. So, um, uh, for entrepreneurs, there's the 0 to 1 podcast, right? There's all of the My First Million. Those are always really inspiring to go listen to. And honestly, I recommend that even for the people like, oh, is it tech focused? Like, well, sometimes you can get a lot of great learnings from people who started retail businesses or e-com businesses or that type of thing, right? So much of entrepreneurship rhymes, no matter what it is you're trying to do, right? So I think those are some great ones. From a personal perspective, I just got done with it's called the Sunshine Place. Is about Straight Incorporated, which was a program in the '80s, which was trying to get kids who were addicted to drugs like off the streets and that type of thing, and it turned into this cult, just wild, like politics, money, power. It was absolutely crazy. I'm not a true crime junkie, but I let's say true crime adjacent. So sometimes it's nice to listen to things that are just totally outside of the business world, and so that's what I recommend. It was really gripping.
All right. So you kind of already answered this question, but I'm going to answer it again or ask it again. So like for fun, what do you like to do outside of work?
Yeah, I mean, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and they are basically the drivers of my hobbies
Yes.
these days. So Ella and Nate, shout out to them. They're a whole lot of fun, but they take up a whole lot of time. So these days you'll find me at playgrounds, you'll find me at meetups, you'll do the classic like parenting thing, right? But it's cool. Our town has this program where folks who are in town new for the first 5 years get together and do social events together, and a lot of us are the same stage of life, so a lot of people with young families, that type of thing. So we'll often be doing a new in town event with folks, and that's kind of developed my outside of work social network, so to speak.
Those like mom groups are powerful.
you know
Cause
you know
like when my kids were little, I just moved and same type of thing was in this like parenting group and talking to this guy and he's like, what do you do? I'm like, I'm like kind of like I'm a recruiter, but I also have this site that I'm kind of like experimenting with. And he's like, I'm like, what do you do? He's like, oh, I'm a Drupal developer. So next thing you know, he's building VentureFizz. So uh,
That's cool, very cool.
yeah. So, anyways, Paul, well, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great work that you and your team are up to at OnRamp, and obviously all the great advice.
Keith, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.